Hey everybody, my name is Greyce, and welcome to my guide to Warriors in GOAT format. I've played GOAT format for close to 3 or 4 years now, both online and in person, and when it boils down to it, my deck of choice when I'm trying to be as competitive as possible is the Warrior deck. I have hundreds and hundreds of games on Warriors, and while I don't think I'm one of the best Warrior players in the world, I do feel like I have a decent understanding of a lot of the card choices and interactions, and I feel like I can play the deck fairly well to a certain degree. So I wanted to make a guide. This guide is more directed towards either newer players or if you are kind of switching over to Warriors and you're used to using a different deck or something along those lines. This is not a guide for the most seasoned GOAT format veterans. Some of the information might be redundant. But if you're kind of dipping your toes in the water with GOAT format and you want to learn how to play Warriors and how to play it effectively and maybe have some of the card choices explained, why we run them, why we don't, then this will be a good guide for you. The last thing I'll mention before we dive into this is that this is not conclusive by any means. This is all just my opinion. There's going to be other great duelists that probably disagree with some of the things that I'm going to say in here, especially with some of the stuff that's a bit more subjective, as far as like matchups and good cards and bad cards. There's going to be parts where you may disagree with me, and that's all right. This is just my opinion, and I'm laying it out. And yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the guide. All right, the first thing we're going to look at is the strengths and the weaknesses of playing Warriors in GOAT format. And while many of these things I think are true to a certain extent, they're not, I don't believe in any, 100% in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think that everything should be taken with a grain of salt, and there's always exceptions to the rules. So the first strength of Warriors is that it often wins quick. This is not necessarily always true. You can still win grind games with Warriors, but at the same time, Warriors want to beat you down. They want to attack your life points. They want to make quick and efficient trades and come out on top as quickly as possible. Warrior games usually go quicker, especially if you're playing like a Warrior mirror match. Those games usually end a lot quicker than a control or a chaos mirror match typically. So that's kind of one of the strengths of Warriors, I think, is that it wins quick. You don't have to put a ton of thought into some wins. Sometimes you just do the Warrior beatdown thing where you just summon a bunch of monsters and they don't have answers and you have the answers to their answers and you just beat them down. You have the Solemn Judgments to negate anything they try to stop, and you just beat them down with your big monsters before they have a chance to really fight back. And I think that's a strength of the deck. That's one of the main win conditions for Warriors a lot of the time. The next strength, I will say, is the Chaos Turbo matchup, and this is kind of a controversial take. I will talk a little bit more about this in the matchups section, but in general, Warriors has cards that deal with the Chaos Turbo cards well. You have a lot of things that deal with flip effects, which is one of the main sources of advantage for Chaos Turbo. But at the same time, I don't think the matchup is necessarily cut and dry, as if Warriors automatically is good against Turbo. It really depends on the players. That's one of the big components of this. But in general, I mean, Chaos Turbo is the tier 0 deck in GOAT format, in my opinion. I think Warriors is just one tier below it. I think it's the second best deck. But just the fact that it has a decent matchup against Turbo, I think, is a strength in its own right, because if you want to be a functioning deck in GOAT format, you have to have at least a decent matchup against Turbo, because it is the tier 0 deck. If you play in a very competitive tournament, you're going to run into tons of Chaos Turbo, and just having at least a decent matchup against Turbo is a major strength in my eyes. Next is that the Warrior deck is quite versatile, and I think a lot of that is because of the card Rhoda. Because of Reinforcement of the Army, you can search out a lot of different answers to different situations, especially games 2 and 3, when you can side into some more versatility with your Warrior toolbox with cards such as Cliff and others, and it kind of allows you to attack different situations based off of how you see fit, and this Warrior toolbox allows you to play quite versatile. It allows you to win against almost any matchup. While some matchups are harder and easier than others, which we'll talk about in a moment, I think that Warrior has quite a bit of versatility because of this toolbox. Next is that in general, Warriors is easier to play than a lot of the other top decks, and I say easier. I do not think that Warriors is easy to play. That is such a, I don't know, I think that's such an overdone statement, people saying that Warriors is just, slam Blade Knight and set 5, and a lot of times it is. Sometimes there are games that take zero thought, like I mentioned in the wins quick strength. Sometimes you just win games just from beating them down really quick, but there's other times that games do take a lot of thought. And I think notably playing Rhoda, figuring out what to actually search off of it depending on the situation can have major implications on the game, and you can really mess that up in a lot of situations. Figuring out, just playing 3 copies of Solemn Judgment, that card in a lot of situations requires thought, especially if it's like an early game Solemn, whether to do it or not. That can have major implications down the game further. So I'd say that they are definitely easier to play than most of the other decks. There are some games that you play pretty brainless, but there are a lot of key decision points that you can really screw up if you aren't playing well or not thinking straight. Next, we'll move on to the weaknesses. One is that Warriors have a lower comeback potential. Warriors can come back. You can just draw into Trinity and cycle through it and make a bit of a comeback. You can top deck BLS at the right time. But in general, Warriors do have a lower comeback potential. They don't have cards that just automatically grant a ton of free advantage, where a deck like Chaos Turbo might. If Chaos Turbo draws into, a Graceful Charity at the right time, they can make much more use of it with cards like Night Assailant and Thunder Dragon and Sinister Serpent, where if you draw into Graceful with Warriors, you can just cycle further through your deck, but not necessarily make these huge advantage swings. So lower comeback potential with Warriors is true. Next is that Warriors, I think, is more easily susceptible to both stall cards and Royal Decree. I'll start with stall cards. One of the biggest nightmares for Warriors, and one of the things that if you're playing this deck, you're going to have the hardest time with, is Gravekeeper Spy. I mean, it's one of the most popular cards in the meta at the moment, and it probably will continue to be indefinitely in GOAT format, and you're going to have to find answers to it, and you're going to have to prepare for it. And cards like this that have really high defense, because in general your strategy with Warriors is going to be to try to gain your advantage through battle. You're gaining your pluses through cards like Mystic Swordsman level 2 and Blade Knight. You're trying to gain your advantage through battle, and if you cannot be attacking over cards because their defense is too high for you to get through, then you're going to be getting stalled out, and you're going to be giving them a lot of chances to get back into the game. Like I mentioned, lower comeback potential for Warriors. So if you are at an even game state early in the game and you can kind of get rid of the spies and beat them down as quickly as possible, that's ideal. But if you leave those spies up on the board too long on your opponent's side of the field, they're going to eventually draw into big power cards to make these big advantage swinging plays that you just can't come back from. So getting stalled out is a really frustrating thing in Warriors, and you need to find answers for it. Also, Royal Decree, I mean, you just run so many traps, so Royal Decree is a big problem and a lot of matchups, so you need to be prepared for that, games 2 and 3. The last thing, I guess this is kind of an opinion, but Warriors does tend to play more boring. I mean, I don't think anybody has a ton of fun playing hundreds and hundreds of Warrior games in a row. If you've seen on my YouTube channel, I tend to just not play Warriors just for fun. If I'm playing ladder matches or something like that, I just don't play it. It's just you see the same cards over and over again, and I think that it can be sort of boring to a certain extent. But at the same time, in like a tournament setting where you're really trying to win, I don't think it's boring. I think it's fun. I think it's competitive. I like a lot of the card interactions, but yeah, playing the same deck over and over again, especially something like Warriors where you're just summoning Blade Knight, setting a bunch of back row, rinse and repeat over and over again, that can be boring. So I guess I would sort of consider that a weakness. So that covers the strengths and weaknesses in general. All right, next we're going to be looking at some of the Warrior matchups. This section, I think more than any other, is going to be incredibly subjective. There's going to be things that you might agree or disagree with me here. That's just the way it is. And in general, there's no 100% good matchups or 100% bad matchups. I think that it really depends on the players. It depends on the builds of the deck. It depends on luck, obviously, is a huge factor in Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, if you're a really, really good player and you're playing against a tougher matchup deck, if you're better than your opponent, you're going to find ways to edge them out, even if their deck most of the time functions better. So, and vice versa. There's no 100%. But this is just to give you just a general idea of what matchups you should be more prepared for and which might be easier. So first, we'll start from the left with the most difficult. I would say Control is a really, really tough matchup for Warriors, whether that's like Thunder Dragon Chaos Control, running, Scapegoat's Metamorphosis and all the Chaos stuff, or just standard Goat Control. And these matchups are just really, really, really hard. I mean, one of the reasons is because they run Scapegoat, and like I mentioned in the strengths and weaknesses section, Warriors are very susceptible to cards that stall out the game, and Scapegoats does exactly that. It slows down the game, and you need to summon multiple monsters on board to get through the Scapegoats if you don't have an instant way to deal with it, like Tribe Infecting Virus or Torrential Tribute or something along those lines. And then you're more susceptible to Thousand Eyes Restrict because you're summoning more monsters onto the board, and you really play into their strategy. So Control is very hard to deal with. And also, because they're bringing out Thousand Eyes Restrict, they're going to be taking your beaters and beating you down with it, where if you're playing a Control matchup yourself and Thousand Eyes Restrict comes out, often they'll be taking your face down monsters. No, if you're playing Warriors, they're 99% of the time going to be taking your face up beaters and beating you down with them, which is very tricky. And then you still have to get through Thousand Eyes, and then you have to get through the Scapegoat tokens, and it's a very, very tough matchup. On top of that, they run Royal Decree as well, sometimes in the main deck and sometimes in the side deck, depending on the build. So in general, Control is just a very tricky matchup. Game 1 is very difficult. Games 2 and 3, you can consider siding into King Tiger Wanghoos and stuff like that to help deal with the Scapegoat tokens. I think that's a really good strategy. I usually will max out on copies of King Tiger in my side decks when I'm playing Warrior, just as a method to deal with Control. But the matchup is still quite difficult in a lot of instances. Sometimes you can just win if you just make sure they don't resolve a Scapegoat, by solemning it or doing whatever you need to end phase Dust Tornado, end phase MST to make sure that Scapegoat doesn't go off. Then yeah, sometimes you can beat them down before they get a chance to really get the game going. But if they're able to stall you out for a few turns with Scapegoat or Thousand Eyes Restrict and stuff like that, then the game can kind of spiral out of control for you. So next is, I kind of lumped two together, Zombies and Monarchs, and the general theme between these two is that they're bringing out big beaters that are stronger than your Warrior monsters in a lot of instances, and it's very, very tough to deal with. If you are staring down a Ryukoki or you're staring down a Zaborg, top decking a Blade Knight feels horrible because you just don't have a ton of answers to it outside of Exiled Forest and DD Warrior Lady and Tribe and some of your other spell trap removal. But your main monsters themselves are not going to deal with these big beaters. Zombies is tough because you're trying to gain your advantage through battle. You're trying to gain your advantage by attacking over your opponent's monsters, but they want you to attack into their monsters. They want you to run into their pyramid turtles. They want you to attack into their giant rats so they can bring out Lily, so they can bring out Ryukoki, so that they can bring out Vampire Lord, all of which are incredibly difficult for Warriors to deal with. On the Monarch side of things, they run cards like Brain Control and Soul Exchange, cards that are taking your big beaters, throwing them in the graveyard, and then bringing out their monsters that you really have a hard time dealing with in general. Plus, Monarchs will often run Mobius, which is a pretty good card against Warriors because you're running so many back rows. And both of these decks, Zombies and Monarchs, will sometimes run Royal Decree, which can be a big problem as well. Next, we'll look at Earth Aggro. I think that Earth Aggro is closer to the middle than most people say. I in general don't always have the super hardest time playing against Earth Aggro if you kind of know what they're trying to do. But it still can be a tricky matchup. Kind of the same argument with Zombies and with the Monarchs is that they're bringing out monsters that are evenly matching or are slightly bigger than your Warriors. So your advantage that you're trying to get through battle kind of becomes negated because you cannot attack over their big monsters. You have to crash with their Gigantes, which can be a huge problem because it then blows up your field. the 2300 guy, I don't know why I can't, Goblin Attack Force or whatever his name is, I can't remember. He can be tricky to deal with because he gets over virtually anything that you bring out outside of BLS. They can swarm the field quicker than you with Gigantes because they can bring out these beaters at a quicker rate than you can, with warriors only being able to rely heavily on the normal summon outside of premature burial and call the haunted. So yeah, Earth Aggro in general, I think is a tougher matchup just because their beaters are slightly bigger than you. But if you kind of know what they're doing, you can adapt and win. Next is kind of more on the less difficult side. I put Chaos Turbo. This is, like I said, this is a bit controversial. Chaos Turbo is still a very, very tough matchup. And what I will say is that the best of the best Chaos Turbo players, if you're playing against somebody that's a really good Turbo player, this is not going to be less difficult. I mean, the matchup is going to be very hard. They're going to know what to do against warriors. They're going to have really heavy side deck cater towards warriors going into games 2 and 3. They're going to bring in the Zombiers. They're going to bring in stall cards. They're going to bring in battle traps. They're going to bring in stuff that makes this matchup incredibly difficult to deal with. They're not going to be setting their Decoiches for you to run over with your Blade Knight. They're going to be summoning it in face-up attack position and making you deal with it. They're going to be feeding lights and darks into their grave as quickly as possible. And so the matchup is still very, very tough. I think if you play against a lesser skilled Chaos Turbo player, you can definitely take advantage of them, knowing that they're going to be setting a lot of stuff, knowing that you can be getting your pluses through Blade Knight, through Mystic Swordsman level 2, stuff like that, through Kaiku, obviously, in the main deck. Slowing down the Chaos strategy is a big help. But Chaos Turbo, if you're playing against a good Turbo player, it's going to be a very, very tough match regardless. But in general, I think that the Warrior cards counter the Turbo cards to a certain extent. But as the game changes and develops, Turbo players are getting better and better and better at dealing with warriors. That's just my general thought. We'll see how that changes over the next months, but as of right now, that's my opinion on the matchup. And then I think a little bit on the easier side, I'm not going to say they are just give me matchups. They are still very difficult, is Reasoning Gate and Burn. I'll start with Reasoning Gate. Reasoning Gate can be a problem because of scapegoats. But very often one of the reasons that I feel like this matchup is more on the less difficult side is because you can put a lot of damage on board very quickly by just normal summoning a monster. The next turn, normal summoning another, and not fearing Torrential, not fearing Mirror Force. You can beat them down fairly quickly. You also run Solemn Judgment, which is a really, really good card against Reasoning Gate. If you can just stop their one push, their one reasoning, you can really slow down the tempo of the game. You also run Dust Shoot a lot of the time, so you can see what they have and then just adjust accordingly. In general, I just think Solemn is a really good card against Reasoning Gate, and that helps you a lot in the matchup, and you can kind of beat them down before they can really get a lot of their combos going. Though Reasoning Gate sometimes will just do Reasoning Gate things where they just beat you before you get a chance to even play. So that's just how it goes sometimes, though. Burn, like when I first started playing Warriors, I thought that Burn was a really, really tough matchup for Warriors, but the more that I played it, the more I realized that games 2 and 3, you have a huge advantage if you side properly, if you keep Mystic Walks in the side, if you side into Cliff and into Mobius and you know the strategy of what they're trying to do. Mystic Swordsman level 2 is a really good card against Burn because you can attack their face downs. It gets under level limit area B, it gets under Gravity Bind and stuff like this. And in general, I think that you have a decent Burn matchup. Now, you'll see that that's as far as the matchup matrix goes. I don't think there's any like free matchups for Warriors. I really don't think there's anything that's that cut and dry. In general, like I said, this is just a very broad look at what matchups I think are slightly more difficult and slightly less difficult. This is very, very broad, very subjective, but I just wanted to give you a general idea into how I view some of these matchups. All right, now we're going to look at kind of a sample warrior deck list. This is very, very standard, nothing kind of crazy with this list, but these cards have proven again and again to be successful card choices in Warriors. I'll also talk about later, in a later section, we'll go over some of the alternate card choices that you could consider. but this is just a very, very standard build, and I want to go through basically every single card in the main deck, and we can talk about why they are played in the warrior deck, why they've proven to be successful, and maybe I can give a few kind of tips and tricks along the way about how to effectively play these cards. And yeah, we'll probably spend less time on the spells and traps, but mainly the monsters is a big thing. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the most important parts of playing warriors is figuring out what to get off of reinforcement of the army. It's a very crucial step in every game, is figuring out what to get off of Rhoda. If you get the wrong thing at the wrong time, you can be in trouble. If you grab a Blade Knight and you run into a Gravekeeper Spy, that could be a really big issue. So you have to grab the right cards at the right time off of Rhoda, and so we'll kind of talk about the different warriors, their pros and cons, when might be better to get them, when not, etc., etc. A lot of this video I had kind of planned out and scripted, but a lot of this is going to be kind of off the top, so yeah, forgive me for any stumbling along the way. So let's go ahead and get into it. First, Blade Knight is usually played at a triple in warrior decks. I mean, sometimes you can see two if they're running a build with flips, but we'll talk about those different kind of variations in just a moment. But typically, Blade Knight's played at 3, and it's just basically the heart and soul of this deck. It's a big beater that gets up to 2,000 most of the time because you're running very few monsters. Typically, warriors will run anywhere from 13 to 15 monsters, something along those lines, and very often you're going to be able to set a lot of your spells and traps and get Blade Knight up to 2,000, which is a pretty crucial attack point in GOAT format. It's very, very powerful. Obviously, it deals with flip effects, which is incredibly important in GOAT format, with some of the best flips being the most important part of the format. Magician of Faith, Dekoichi. These are cards that you're going to want to deal with, and Blade Knight is very, very effective at doing so. Blade Knight's also very important against other decks. I mean, it just does really, really well against other aggressive decks in the mirror match. Who basically has the Blade Knight up at the end of the game is usually the person who wins. This is just the heart and soul of your deck. It's very, very important. It's light, so it helps feed BLS. It's searchable off of Rhoda. It's just very, very important part of the warrior strategy. The only downside is Blade Knight kind of gets stuffed by Gravekeeper Spy, which you will encounter quite often if you're playing against Turbo or any other deck that's running Gravekeeper Spy. It can be incredibly frustrating when you are expecting to run over a Dekoichi and you run into a Gravekeeper Spy. But that's just part of GOAT format, and part of playing warriors is figuring out how to navigate those situations. But I mean, besides Gravekeeper Spy, Blade Knight's fantastic. It's just a great card. It's the heart and soul of the deck. Next is Kaiku. Typically, Kaiku is played at 2 or 3, depending on kind of the meta that you're expecting. If it's more chaos focused, then 3 is probably good. If you're expecting more warriors or aggressive decks, or even you're expecting more control, then maybe 2 might be better. But in general, Kaiku is just a fantastic card. When GOAT format kind of had its resurgence a few years ago, Kaiku was not initially played in warrior decks, but with chaos becoming more and more a prevalent part of the meta, Kaiku kind of rose in popularity alongside, and it's just an incredibly good anti-meta card dealing with chaos, which you're just going to play a ton of chaos if you're playing warriors in a tournament or playing warriors on the ladder. You'll just run into chaos a lot. So this card is just incredibly effective at dealing with chaos. It's good in other situations as well. In the mirror match, it helps remove to make sure that they can't make their big BLS play. Against Earth aggro, it shuts off their Gigantes summon. Just a really, really good card. And I think it's necessary in a deck like this. You have a lot of ways to protect it with Solemn Judgment and Sakuretsu Armors, Book of Moon, Dust Tornadoes to help your attacks go through. Also, Kaiku synergizes really well with a lot of cards in this deck, because if Kaiku can stick on board, if you summon it and it stays on board, the next turn comes around, you summon Mystic Swordsman level 2, you summon Exiled Force, and let's say they set a monster expecting you to run your Kaiku into a Magician of Faith or run your Kaiku into a Gravekeeper Spy. Instead, you bring out Exiled Force and you tribute it to destroy their spy, then your Kaiku gets to remove that key dark from their graveyard. So it synergizes well with several of the the cards in this deck, as well along with Call of the Haunted, Premature Burial, are all very good. You can even, if you have a Kaiku in your graveyard, when it comes to your opponent's turn and you are anticipating some sort of chaos play, you can summon Kaiku off of Call of the Haunted in their standby phase, rendering their chaos play useless. So there's a lot of really cool use cases for Kaiku, and it's just a great card in an aggressive deck like this. DD Warrior Lady, limited to 1, I believe, in GOAT format, so you might play more potentially if it wasn't, but this is just an all-around fantastic card in the Warrior deck. It's never the best card in your deck, but it's never the worst card in your deck. It's a great turn 1 summon because of its effect, where you it effectively banishes whatever it attacks into or whatever attacks into it. It's always going to be a 1-for-1 trade. It's always going to at least get 1 card from your opponent. They're never going to just summon Blade Knight and attack over your DD Warrior Lady because of its effect. So it's a great turn 1 summon, and it's great for taking care of problematic monsters. So next up is Don's Lug. Awesome card when you're starting out and it's searchable off of Rhoda. If you have if they set a monster turn 1 and you have Nobleman, Don's Lug pairs really nicely with that, because you can summon Don's Lug, then Nobleman their monster, then get in with the attack, and then rip a card from their hand. It just, like I mentioned, Warriors are trying to take very quick, efficient trades, and Don's Lug certainly allows you to do that, especially because we're running multiple copies of Dust Tornado in the main deck. So very often your opponent will just set a back row and set a monster. Well, if you have a Dust Tornado set, you end phase Dust Tornado their back row, summon Don's Lug, use Nobleman, do whatever you need to do to get rid of their face down, and then you get a free attack in, get a free hit with Don's Lug. Sometimes I will side Don's Lug out games 2 and 3, depending on the matchup, depending on what I'm trying to side in, but still just a fantastic card at taking those quick, efficient trades. And sometimes Don's Lug single-handedly just wins you games. Sometimes you just do the Don's Lug beat down. They don't have an answer to it. They don't have a way to deal with it, and you're just getting so many free pluses from Don. So great card. You can also get tricky with it sometimes by setting it, but that's not really recommended game 1. Yeah, I'll say that real quick. I noticed a lot of newer Warrior players, they see the decent defense on DD Warrior Lady or Don's Lug, and they try to get tricky by setting them. You rarely, if ever, want to be setting monsters game 1 in Warriors, because one of the fantastic pluses of playing Warriors is that you are rendering your opponent's Nobleman of Crosshouse useless. And by setting monsters, you're making their Noblemans live. Obviously, if you've seen they've gone through both of their Noblemans, or they've discarded them, or for whatever reason, then sure, set away. But by setting these, you're just making their Noblemans live game 1. So I would advise against that in most situations, but nothing's 100%. Exile Force is just your fantastic 1-for-1 spot removal. Bring it out anytime you need it. Sometimes you'll see that your opponent will set a monster face down, and they'll set a spell trap alongside. Those put you in tricky situations, especially if you have like a Rhoda in hand, because you're not sure, should I go Mystic Swordsman level 2 and attack into the face down? Should I go Blade Knight and attack to the face down? Should I summon Exiled and tribute it to pop the face down? There's several different options, and a lot of that is based upon what you are reading your opponent has set. And what you're effectively trying to do, what cards you have in your hand. As a general rule of thumb, like I said, often if I feel like my opponent's set spell or trap is not a battle trap or not a way to deal with an attacking monster, I will go with Mystic Swordsman level 2 or Blade Knight, depending on the situation. If I have like a Sakuretsu or a Mirror Force or a Book of Moon or a way to protect, I will often go Mystic Swordsman level 2. If I don't, I would go Blade Knight. But if I anticipate that my opponent's back row is a battle trap or a way to deal with an attacking monster, then I'll often go Exiled Force. And in general, too, if you have a Nobleman in your hand, you can do some interesting things, such as summon Blade Knight, see if they let the attack go through, and if they don't let the attack go through, then that means they're obviously trying to protect a valuable flip monster, so then main phase 2, you activate Nobleman. So instead of just ripping Nobleman right away. But that's just a little tip. But then sometimes you bring out Exiled if you anticipate that they could have a set spell or trap that doesn't allow your attack to go through. Exiled also combos really well with the 2 recursion spells, Premature Burial, or I guess Spell and Trap, and Call of the Haunted. It combos really well with both of those for just free spot removal. Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke, another great searchable Rhoda target. This card just becomes better and better and better as the meta has evolved because of the prevalence of Gravekeeper Spy, because of the prevalence of Spirit Reaper. Any face-up defensive position monsters, it helps deal with it. Against bad Chaos players, they'll, good Chaos players, when they're playing against Warriors, they're going to summon their Blackluster Soldiers, they're going to summon their Chaos Sorcerers in attack position against Warriors, but often against newer players, they'll summon their Chaos Sorcerers in defense, and you can take advantage of that with Sasuke. Also just a great card to bring out when you're not able to get your Blade Knight up to 2,000 attack, because you can summon, let's say they have a Tribe on board, or they have a used up Breaker on board, and you don't have a way to deal with that, and you have a Rhoda in hand. You don't want to use an Exiled Force to trade with a used up Breaker. You don't want to use a DD Warrior Lady to trade 1-for-1 with a Breaker. Instead, and you have too many monsters in hand, you can't bring out Blade Knight, so then you go search for Sasuke and get that nice plus. So sometimes it can come in handy when you're not able to get your Blade Knight up to 2,000. Mystic Swordsman level 2, just great at destroying face downs, essentially. If you're playing against the mirror match or or other aggressive decks, usually you'll side it out games 2 or 3, but this is self-explanatory. You just use it to destroy face down monsters. It combos well with a lot of stuff in your deck. There's also variations of Warriors I've seen that run like 2 of these and double Book of Moon, because this combos really well with Book of Moon. You can attack into your opponent's monster, and then after you declare the attack, you can activate Book of Moon on their monster, flipping it face down, and getting a nice attack in there. The one thing with Mystic Swordsman level 2 is you're going to want to have some protection to back it up, because if you're playing against Chaos Turbo, a good Chaos player, you will get your nice plus with Mystic Swordsman level 2, but then next turn, if they have a Spy or a Takoichi in hand, they're not going to set it again. They're going to summon it in face-up attack position and try to plus back over your Mystic Swordsman level 2. So having a way to protect it's always nice. Breaker is just such a good staple monster in most decks in GOAT format, and I think it's really effective in aggressive strategies too. BLS, you run a nice ratio of lights and darks to support it. You really don't want to run any more Chaos monsters or any less. It's BLS. It's just one of the most broken cards in the format. You got to run it if you're running this many lights and darks. And then Tribe Infecting Virus. This also was not a staple in many Warrior decks earlier in the format, but as people have seen the prevalence emerging of Gravekeeper Spy and stuff like that, it's just too good. So that is the monster lineup typically, but we will talk about some alternate card choices in just a moment. So moving on to the spells and traps, Heavy Storm. This seems a little counterintuitive because you're running so many spells and traps, but it's just such a powerful card. It helps you go for game, helps you make giant pushes, and also, the more you play, the more you can learn to be a little tricky with Heavy Storm by potentially setting it and trying to set up a pro heavy or kind of baiting your opponents into setting stuff and then getting a nice plus with your heavy. So it's just such a good card in the format. You just have to play it, especially if you're running up against the mirror match. I mean, nowadays turbo decks are running a lot of traps. They're just really good against virtually every matchup, most matchups. Premature Burial, kind of talked about that earlier with Call of the Haunted. These cards are kind of in the same vein. They're, you're not doing a ton of special summoning with Warriors, so, you kind of have your one normal summon per turn, and that's it. And so these help you speed up that process by giving you an extra summon per turn, allowing you to put a lot of damage on board very, very quickly, allowing you to recur key removal monsters like Exiled Force. Next up, Trinity, self-explanatory. MST, just another good spell trap removal. Noblemen's, staples. Warriors, the Rhoda, staple. Not a ton to say there. Snatch Steal, very good. And Book of Moon, this is sometimes played in warrior decks, sometimes not. Depends on what kind of meta you're expecting. This is just a kind of general all-around build that I like to play. I like one Book of Moon in warriors quite often, just to help shore up your control matchup. It's also just a good card in general, pairs well with Mystic Swordsman level 2. It's just very versatile. You can run it, you cannot, it's up to you. Then other great traps we'll move on to now. Torrential, Mirror Force, your kind of big mass removal traps. Torrential, sometimes not played, and I've seen some really good warrior players side out Torrential, or they have it in the side deck initially. I really like having it with the prevalence of Gravekeeper Spy. I think most of the time it's just too good. People are going to play into it sometimes, and it's just a great piece of mass removal. But if you decide you don't want it, that makes sense, because you're going to be having a board presence more often than not, and so you don't want to torrential your own board. You don't run Sanguine or Sinister to pair with the torrential. So I understand cutting it, but I think it's just too good. Mirror Force, Ring, kind of self-explanatory. Call the Haunted. I mentioned that earlier. Next is Sakuretsu Armor. These battle traps, you can kind of change the ratios of them as you see fit, how you like it to be. But in general, they're nice to have some protection to protect your Mystic Swordsman level 2. They're also just good against the mirror match and other aggressive strategies. So it's nice to shore up those matchups with the battle traps in the main deck. And they're also fairly good against chaos and control. They're not the best, but they get the job done. Next is triple Solemn Judgment. This is just completely necessary in a deck like this, because very often you'll be going Summon Blade Knight or Summon Kaiku, then setting 4 or 5 spells and traps, and so having Solemns to protect against heavy is really nice. Solemn just really fits the warrior strategy of what you're trying to do. You're trying to simplify the game state. You're trying to get it down to a top deck war as quickly as possible, because while your opponent will have cards that they're trying to combo together, you have monsters like Blade Knight and Kaiku that are just amazing standalone cards, so you're trying to get down to the top decking or simplify things as quickly as possible. And Solemn Judgment just says no. They activate Pot of Greed, no. They activate Graceful Charity, no. It just helps really good against chaos, because when they're dropping their big chaos monsters, if you have the Solemn to stop it, that's their big push a lot of the time. And also, Solemn is just so versatile. It's fantastic in a million different ways. When you're making a big push, say you have Blade Knight, Kaiku, and Sasuke on board, and you're making this big push trying to push through their board, and they have a key Torrential or a key Mirror Force, the Solemn's there to protect against it. You Solemn their Solemns. It's just a really important part of this deck. I will say in the mirror match, you have to be careful, because very often you'll think you'll be having a key Solemn Judgment that's going to stop something big that they're doing, but then they'll Solemn Judgment you back, and usually the last person to activate Solemn is going to come out on top in that trade. So just be mindful of that. Next is Dust Tornadoes. I've seen between 1 to 3 of these. I have 3 in the main deck, but that usually changes games 2 and 3. I'll usually side out like one of them. But Dust Tornado is fantastic at doing the same thing Solemn Judgment does, at doing the same thing Sakuretsu does, at doing the same thing Blade Knight does, just simplifying things, getting down to 1 or 2 cards in hand for you and your opponent as quickly as possible. It deals with threats, it deals with Snatch, it deals with hitting their Sakuretsus, it deals with hitting their mass removal traps like Torrential and Mirror Force, and it allows you to play very aggressive. So Dust Tornado is just fantastic. And then last, Trap Dust Shoot. This is all very meta dependent. A lot of these trap ratios, what you want to do. I think obviously 3 Solemn is a staple, and these 3 traps are completely necessary. But as far as the other ratios, you can kind of change it up as you see fit. Double Trap Dust Shoot I think is fairly standard, but you'll see 3, you'll see 1, you'll see none. But I think usually in the current meta, you probably should run at least 2. They're just too good in the chaos matchup. You'll side them out games 2 and 3 against warriors, against the mirror match. But in general, it's fantastic because it allows you to see your opponent's hand. It allows you to kind of calculate your aggression, because you see, all right, well, they have Torrential. That's their one defensive trap that they have. I just need to bait out that Torrential, and then once you see that they use Torrential, you know that you can start getting really aggressive without being concerned about anything else. Now, obviously, they can draw into Mirror Force or whatever, but In general, it allows you to calculate your aggression. It allows you to put back problematic monsters like Gravekeeper Spy, and kind of allows you to just calculate what you need to do to win the game. And very often it's enough to get it done. So that's just a kind of general look at the main deck of Warriors. Next, we will be moving on to look at some of the variations of the Warrior deck. Like I said, this is a very standard list, but there's plenty of different variations, different ways that you could play it. And so we'll get into that in just a moment. All right, now we're going to look at some different variations on Warriors. And in general, I think that Warrior variations are incredibly underrated and incredibly underplayed. I mean, this includes anything that runs Reinforcement of the Army and several, Warriors, some type of Warrior engine. And, as long as GOAT formats have been around, I still think some of this stuff has been kind of unexplored to a certain extent. And I think there's still a lot of possibility out there. And like I said, I think Warrior variations are they're not played enough. I think there's a ton of potential here. And I always appreciate when somebody tries something new and makes it work. And I think that all of these, decks are competitively viable to a certain extent. Many of them have multiple tops at big GOAT format events, despite being underplayed. So if any of these variations looks interesting to you, give it a shot. You might be surprised with how well you kind of mesh with the deck, and you might be surprised with how good you are at it, or how powerful it is. So first, we're going to look at basically this is GOAT control combined with Warriors. It's kind of an interesting strategy. This is Mr. Man's deck from the 2022 GOAT Format World Championship, though others have piloted this deck to success as well. You're basically, like I said, combining the Warrior strategy with the GOAT control strategy. It allows you to play that aggressive Warrior game, but when necessary, you can kind of slow down the pace of play a little bit with Scapegoats. I think that this deck is not as good against Chaos Turbo than the standard Warrior list. I might be wrong, that's just my opinion, but I think that this deck is better against the Warrior matchup, against the mirror match essentially, than the standard Warrior list. I think this, Scapegoat really allows you to slow down the pace of play, along with Metamorphosis allowing you to take your opponent's big Warrior beaters. This is just a really, really cool strategy. I think it's very effective. I've tried this deck before and it has not gone well. I just don't mesh super well with control type strategies. Maybe I'm just too ape brained to make this work, but it's really, really cool. I think that it does, I will say it requires a skilled pilot. I think to a certain extent this deck is much more unforgiving in my opinion than your kind of cookie cutter Warrior list. It needs to be played to a high level to see success, but we've seen some great Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists, Mr. Man included, pilot this deck to success. So really cool variation. You're combining GOAT control with Warriors. Give it a shot. Next up, this is from the recent GFC. This is Ludovico Rizzo's deck. This is a fairly standard Warrior list if you look at the trap lineups, the spell lineups, if you look at the monster lineups, except for the flips that are played in here. We have double Dokoichi and double Gravekeeper Spy. I think this is a really cool variation on Warriors. Now, flip Warriors have been around. There's been others that have topped, beside Ludovico, there's been others that have topped with this deck. Not so fast. I think of recently, he's somebody who had, I think, won a Patreon World Championship qualifier with a variation of Flip Warriors, and it's been around. And back in the day, in I think late 2020 or so, Flip Warriors was kind of had some popularity, and then it kind of faded into obscurity. And it seems like it's back again. It seems like its popularity is growing. And why are people playing this? Why not just play normal Warriors? Because like I mentioned, you don't always want to be setting monsters and warriors, because when you set monsters, you're making your opponent's noblemen's live, where game one, those cards are dead against you. And so why would you play flips? Why would you make your opponent's noblemen's live? Well, there's kind of two parts to it. If your opponent noblemen's a Gravekeeper Spy,
As a warrior player, you're super happy because you want that card out of the game as quickly as possible. You don't want to deal with Spy. You also don't want to deal with incredibly powerful flips like Dekoichi and like Magician of Faith. So when you set these cards and they get noblement, it's not the end of the world because you're getting them out of the game, and your opponent's not going to be able to use them either. And then when their effects actually resolve, if they don't get noblement, they're great effects. If Faith resolves, it's amazing. If Dekoichi resolves, it's nice getting you further into your deck. And of course, Spy is incredibly versatile. People peg Spy as a defensive card, but really it can be quite offensive with 2,400 damage you're putting on board relatively quickly. So I like the concepts here. I think that Flip Warriors is a kind of growing trend. It's also really hard to side against games 2 and 3 because your opponent won't know whether to keep in their noblements, whether to side them out. Typically you side out your Nox against Warriors, but games 2 and 3 against Flip Warriors, do you do it? Do you not? And then really good players will sometimes games 2 and 3, like if they're playing a deck like this, they'll side out their flips. So then your Nox are dead against games 2 and 3, and so it's kind of some mind games there. Overall, I think it's a really cool concept. Try it out if you're interested. This ties in with kind of another variation of Warriors that I've seen around. I think this was pioneered by Indoors to great success at a GFC that he won, GFC 16, and other events. He's done well with this. And this is kind of a similar list. You're running triple Dekoichi with the Warrior engine, but as well, you're running the Bazoo return package right here. If you don't know what Bazoo does, you basically banish monsters in your graveyard to make its attack higher. And then return effectively lets you resurrect by paying half your life points, lets you resurrect all of your banished monsters, and basically you set up game shots with return. You kind of bait out your opponent's battle traps, then in the battle phase you can flip return and just hit your opponent for 7,000 damage or whatever. The reason that you run flips in this deck, I've seen versions of this with Dekoichi, I've seen it with Spy, kind of like the last list we saw. The reason you run these is because when they get noblement, you are happy to get them out of the game, and also they set up your return. If they noblement your Dekoichi, that's putting 1,400 times 3, my math is horrible, out of the game, and that is that much damage that you get to bring back off of return. So this is a really cool strategy as well. I really like this deck. I actually personally played this deck quite a bit, and I really like this variant on Bazoo return with the Warrior engine. Allows you to play super aggressive, and then you just flip return and just steal games sometimes. So that's really cool. Next, we are looking at Gearfried Warriors. This is a list popularized by many players. There's Gearfried Warriors has been around for quite a while, but very, very underplayed. This is a list by Zazzles, who's one of the best Gearfried Warrior players, one of the only people that really plays it to a high level. And if you don't know what Gearfried does, basically whenever an equip spell or trap is attached to it, it destroys it automatically, and that has some interesting synergies with the Smoke Grenade of the Thief. If you want to read more about this strategy, go to Goat Format, look up Gearfried Warrior, and you can kind of read some of these cards and how they interact. But Blast with Chain is also really, really popular because it attaches to Gearfried, and then Gearfried automatically destroys it, and then when it's destroyed by a card effect, you get to destroy a card on the field. So some really cool interactions with Gearfried, and he's a warrior, so you search him off of Rhoda. You run other good warriors as well, like Blade Knight, DD Warrior Lady, Mystic Swordsman level 2, etc., etc. This is a very cool variation, underplayed. Give it a shot if you're interested. Next up, this is I guess they call it Double Tap Warrior. This was popularized by Yada88, who still sometimes plays this deck to this day, and is just it's just so scary to play against when somebody knows what they're doing with this deck. So basically the concept behind this is you're running Mataza the Zapper, which can make 2 attacks per battle phase. That's why the deck is called Double Tap Warrior. And then you run several equip spells along with Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu to search out these equip spells like Axe of Despair, like Big Bang Shot, United We Stand, Mage Power, etc., etc. And you basically, use Trunade to set up these big plays where you Trunade their field to get everything out of the way, and then you summon Mataza, get him to 5,000 attack or whatever, and you just OTK them. and really, really cool variant of the deck. It kind of seems like maybe it might be inconsistent because you're running so many of these equip spells, which, you know, when you see equip spells, most of the time you're thinking, oh, this is kind of outdated GOAT format theory, but this deck is very, very powerful, not to be taken lightly. And if there's a deck that you just want to steal free wins left and right, if you just get some practice with it, this is the deck. I mean, you really just need to calculate damage a lot. But once you've played several matches and you've kind of gotten the vibe of it and how this deck is supposed to function, very, very effective, very powerful. You kind of have to play a little patient. You have to, there's some cool synergies with Trinade, and sometimes you'll use your equip spells, then Trinade them back to your hand at the end after you make a push. You're not always just going to have the perfect Mataza hit them for, you know, 10,000 damage. It doesn't always work like that. But sometimes you have to kind of grind it out. But really, really cool deck. Underrated, underplayed. Give it a shot. Get some practice on it, and you can win a lot of games. Next up. Okay, so those first 5 I showed, they've all had tournament success. These last 2 are not, but I think they're also very, very effective and good decks. This is Drop-Off Warriors. You're running Drop-Off, you're running Time Seal. So essentially the idea behind this is, like I mentioned, you know, probably 20 times in this video, your goal with Warriors is to simplify the game state. And this deck does that, but at an incredible pace by using cards like Time Seal to just skip your opponent's next draw phase. So essentially what you're doing is you're trading your Time Seal for your opponent's next card in their deck, effectively, you know, shrinking the amount of cards that are in play. Same with a card like Drop Off. When your opponent draws for their normal draw phase, they discard the card they just drew. This can be tricky because there are certain cards that they can chain and draw phase off of that, but we won't get into that. And you play, so you're just hyper simplifying the game state as quickly as possible and trying to make your opponent have 1 or 2 cards in hand. You have 1 or 2 cards in hand, and you have these big beaters that they can't deal with. This deck runs Swift Gaia. This says if this is the only card in your hand, you can normal summon this without tributing, so it's a 2300 beater that you can put on board very, very easily in this deck. Usually runs less monsters than the standard warrior deck because you're simplifying things so rapidly. I would say the only downside to this deck is that if you get behind, you're going to stay behind. I mean, Warriors has a hard time getting back into the game in general, like I mentioned earlier, but this deck, this version of it even more so, because, you know, once you're 3 cards behind, if you simplify the game state, you'll have 1 card and your opponent will have 4. It's just, you know, so simplifying the game state isn't always good when you're far behind. But at the same time, this deck can just run over people. You just, in 3 or 4 turns, you can just run them over, get rid of all the cards they have, and all you have is a Swift Gaia just beating them down. They have nothing that they can do. So really, really cool variation. Give that a shot if you're interested as well. And very last, I got to give a little shout out to some spice of my own. This is my light warrior return deck that I have built and played quite a bit. Really, really fun. Never, you know, topped any tournaments or anything, but I think it's underrated. I think it's very, very good, but I'm a little biased. Essentially what this is you're running, you know, I've noticed that a lot of the warriors are light. So you have Blade Knight, you have Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke, you have DD Warrior Lady, and there's also a very great light warrior in Freed, the Brave Wanderer, and you run Thunder Dragons in this deck. And kind of the whole goal behind this is you're playing warriors kind of the standard way. You see the trap lineup is, you know, nothing crazy. You're playing normal warriors and you're getting your lights into the graveyard. Eventually your Blade Knight dies. Eventually your Sasuke dies. You get your Thunder Dragons into the grave by using its effect. And then you bring out cards like Soul of Purity and Light, which you summon by banishing 2 light monsters from your graveyard. And this is a big, you know, a decent boss monster. And then you have Freed that you bring out and you use it to banish 2 light monsters from your graveyard to destroy a monster on the field with higher attack than it, which is a very, very good card. Underrated. It's really good at blowing up your opponent's Blade Knights. It's good at blowing up your opponent's Chaos Sorcerers or BLS or whatever big boss monsters you're staring down. You bring out Freed, get a free plus. And then in doing that, you're banishing a lot of light monsters from your graveyard using Soul of Purity and Light, using Freed, using Bazoo, and then that sets up these return plays that hit for a lot of damage. So this is kind of my version of it. I think it's kind of cool. But ultimately, there's so many different ways that you can play warriors, so many different variations that you can do. If any of these seem interesting to you, give it a shot. Just play some games on ladder. Don't get discouraged if it doesn't go your way the first few games. You got to get some reps in to kind of understand how these decks function, and you'll be surprised with how well they do. All right, pivoting now back to the kind of standard warrior list. I just want to go through a list of some additional card choices that you might consider for either the main deck or the side deck. Many of these cards are staple side deck cards in the warrior deck and GOAT format, while others are, have been featured in the main deck as well in successful lists. So I just want to go through, I just kind of threw all these cards together, and we can just talk through them one by one to kind of talk about why you might want to consider them or not. So, start with Magician of Faith. Magician of Faith, this was recently popularized by one of the best, if not the best, warrior player in GOAT format right now, and that's LeBounty. He, over the last few months has started teching in one Magician of Faith in the warrior deck. The idea behind this is similar, like I mentioned earlier. If it gets knocked, it gets knocked. You get the faiths out of the game, but also if it resolves, it's Magician of Faith. It's just incredibly powerful. Really good duelists against warriors. They'll, if they go Graceful Charity, they will know that you're on warriors, so they'll discard their noblemans. And once you see that their noblemans are out of play, then you set faith and potentially, recycle one of your Trinity pieces, which can be incredibly powerful. Yeah, kind of already talked about the reasoning behind Dekoichi, behind Spy. These can be considered in the main deck. I often like to side Gravekeeper Spy in the side deck against the mirror match because it's such a good card against the aggressive matchup. Most of the time your opponent will side out their noblemen, their Mystic Swordsman level 2, games 2 and 3, and so Spy can resolve and just be a really big wall or an aggressive threat depending on what you want to do. Yeah, I kind of talked about those already. Another interesting stall card, this is searchable off of Rhoda, is Big Shield Gardna. Not played a ton, but I still think is really effective against aggressive matchups. You can search for it, and it just helps stall out, helps put a big wall on board to give you time to set up what you're trying to set up. Same with Spirit Reaper. This has become a lot more popular also thanks to LeBounty and others that have started playing Spirit Reaper either in the side deck or the main deck of Warriors as another way to kind of stall out the game, to kind of slow things down when you need to make your opponent waste resources. I think that's also a very, very crucial part of cards like Spy, Gardna, and Reaper is that they force your opponent to waste a lot of resources to out it. So next we have Giant Trunade. This can be pretty good in the mirror match or against other decks that are playing a lot of spells and traps to allow you to make aggressive pushes happen. It can also synergize well with Premature Burial or potentially Call of the Haunted. This is also kind of recently popularized by a few players, LeBounty included, and yeah, this is really cool. Sometimes it can bait out Solemn Judgments, and if you pair that with one of your powerful spell cards as well, you can bait out the Judgment with Trunade, then make an aggressive push, or if you happen to have Trunade and Heavy together, you can kind of ruin your opponent essentially if they have a bunch set. So cool card, combos really well with a lot of different things. Give it a shot if you're interested. Next up is Swords. This is a good side deck card to bring in against the mirror match or other aggressive decks, and it also pairs well with Trunade because you can reset it on the third turn. Or right before the third turn, I mean. So that can be really good. All right, next up is King Tiger Wangu. This is absolutely a staple in warrior side decks. You need to have it. I mean, you can play Ashura Priest potentially, but King Tiger, in my opinion, is much better because Ashura, it keeps returning to the hand, and you want to be putting a presence on board. And so I feel like Wangu is very, very important part of the side deck in Warriors. Like I mentioned, Control is a nightmare matchup, so having the King Tiger there to prevent the Scapegoat tokens from resolving, to prevent Tsukiyomi from looping you, to prevent a lot of different stuff from happening, from preventing Thousand Eyes to come out. There's a ton of ways that Wangu is helpful against the Control matchup, and it's just incredibly versatile. It's good against Burn. It's good against Reasoning Gate. It's crucial. Got to have it in the side deck, I think. Next is Seven Tools of the Bandit. I like this a lot. I usually always have one of these in my side. It's, I think, underrated. Very, very good card. You bring it in against other decks that are either running a lot of traps or are running Solemn Judgments, because In most use cases, if you're in the warrior mirror match, it's going to come down to those solemn wars where you solemn, and they solemn, and you solemn. And 7 tools effectively reads pay 1,000 life points, negate your opponent's solemn judgment, which is ridiculous. It's incredibly powerful when done in the right situation. It's not a good top deck. It's not, because it has to pair well with other things that you're trying to do. It also allows you to just play aggressive. Once you have it set, I almost like it more than Dust Tornado because you can summon into Torrential and other stuff and, 7 tools to make sure that it doesn't happen. So really good card. I also like it against Burn because very often against Burn, I'm going to be siding out my Solemn Judgments. And so having a 7 tools to prevent their, their Ojama trio from going off and stuff like that can be nice. Next is, I'll talk about these together, Zumbira and Berserk Gorilla. These are cards you can even consider maining one Zumbira because it's searchable off of Rhoda if you want, if you're expecting like a warrior heavy meta at the event you're playing. But more often than not, these are side deck cards that you bring in against aggressive decks. Zumbira, Berserk Gorilla are just incredibly effective. They're good against warriors, so your opponent will be siding these very often, so you need to be stay aware of that. The Zombiras could come in games 2 and 3. They very often will. So just good cards against the aggro strategies. They just beat over Blade Knights. They or in Berserk Gorilla's case, they crash with Blade Knights. They go over Kaikus. They go over Sasuke's and all the other beaters in the warrior deck. So keep an eye out for those. They're coming in games 2 and 3 against you, but also side them yourself against warriors so you can win that mirror match. Next is Amazoness Archer. This is a really good side deck card that you bring in against the Burn matchup because the problem with Burn is that they're going to put those Ojama tokens on your side of the board, and they're going to attack in with their Panda, and it's going to do a lot of damage, or they're going to use Just Desserts or Secret Barrel, and those tokens are going to add up the amount that you're taking. So using Amazoness Archer, it allows you to tribute off these tokens and get them off your field. That's the main thing. You want to get them off your field as quickly as possible, and the extra 1,200 damage is nice because most often in the matchups, you want to be running those deck downs as quickly as possible. You want to just be playing aggressively as possible against Burn just to try to run them down before they can get a nice combo off on you. And so getting rid of those tokens is very important. Also, this is searchable off of Rhoda, which is effective. Then we have Cliff the Trap Remover. This is great when I see that my opponent is siding into Royal Decree, when they're siding into Level Limit Area B, when they're siding into Gravity Bind. I will bring in Cliff because you read his effect. Once he does battle damage, he destroys a spell and trap on the field, allowing your other monsters to follow through because most of the warrior monsters are level 4 and have greater than 1,500 attack, so they are affected by level limit, they're affected by Gravity Bind, whereas Cliff is not, and he can get in there and destroy it. Same with Mobius. I bring Mobius in against Burn, against anything that could run those stall cards, against anything that's running Decree. It's a pretty popular side deck option in the warrior deck, in many decks. He also pairs well with Brain Control, which I'll talk about now. This is a good card to side in against the warrior matchup. The mirror match is good to side in against aggressive decks. A lot of decks Brain Control can be very good against, and sometimes people will try to pair it with Mobius so that you can Brain Control your opponent's monster, then tribute it for Mobius to pop your opponent's back rows. Also, Mobius is very good games 2 and 3 because your opponent might be siding into extra battle traps, which can be really good. So Brain Control also just good against the aggro matchup because let's say they have 2 Blade Knights on board, you steal one of their Blade Knights, crash it into the other Blade Knight, and that's a +1 effectively. So next is Tsukiyomi. People don't always play Tsukiyomi in Warriors, but I really, really like Tsukiyomi in Warriors. I think it's good against the mirror match. The only deck it's not good against is Chaos Turbo, which is the most popular deck. So but even then, it's not horrible because it can make your noblemans live. If you have like a dead nobleman, so you summon Tsukiyomi, flip their monster face down, then nobleman it. It's good against the mirror match. If you're playing Warriors, if you played it a lot of times, you know how frustrating Tsukiyomi can be. The only, main deck warriors that can handle Tsukiyomi are DD Warrior Lady and Donzalug. Outside of that, Tsukiyomi deals with your Blade Knights, it deals with your Sasuke's, it deals with Kaiku, it deals with Mystic Swordsman level 2. It's a big problem. And if you don't have an answer to it, it can just destroy your entire hand, especially if you have multiple monsters in your hand that have less than 1,000 defense. So I like Tsukiyomi against the mirror match. I obviously like it against the control matchup, so you can side it, whatever. One of my best runs in GOAT format was I got top 4 at an obelisk, and I got there with a Tsukiyomi in the main deck. I really feel like it's just a little spice that I like to add, but I like Tsukiyomi a lot in Warriors. Underrated. Already talked about brain control. Widespread Ruin is a good side deck card. It's basically an additional battle trap. You max out on Sakuretsu's first, and then you can, if you want additional battle traps against aggressive matchups like Earth Aggro and against Warriors, then you can bring in Widespread Ruins game 2 and 3. I often will employ that strategy. Bottomless Trapple, another great card against Warriors. If you want to consider it against aggressive decks, this card has been seeing a slight increase in popularity. One of my teammates in the War League is a big advocate of Bottomless Trapple, Mr. Big Noodle. So this is a very, very underrated card. I think it's, sometimes you'll hit breakers with it. And I think it's a great side deck card, and you can even consider it in the main deck as well if you're expecting a lot of aggro. Next, this is a very popular card in Warriors as of late, and that is Xing Zhenhu. Fantastic, because very often in Warriors, you're going to be setting a lot of cards face down, and so your opponent will often match. And so when you're able to zing 2 of their cards in the end phase, you effectively get a +1, and just a really, really powerful card. Good against Turbo, because Turbo is playing more and more traps these days, and like I said, they'll set a lot to match your field. It's really good against the mirror match because you can shut off Solemn Judgments, you can shut off battle traps and all the other stuff that they're going to be having set. So just a really, really good card for locking out your opponent's back row. Very effective. Next, I want to talk about Jar of Greed and Upstart Goblin. These are, the classic kind of consistency cards that give your deck a little more consistency. More often, you'll see Jar of Greed in Warriors because there has been debate about whether giving your opponent that extra 1,000 LP in an aggressive deck, if it's really a trade-off that's worth it. And I don't have the answers to that, but it can work. I've seen people pilot Warriors to great success with Upstart in the main deck. Personally, I wouldn't do it, but I think it's perfectly fine, as well as Jar Greed. It just helps add to that consistency. Sometimes you can plus on it when your opponent MSTs it, or sometimes they will breaker and hit your Jar Greed, which can always be nice. So I've played Jar Greed in the main deck before. It's not bad. I think if you're going to play Jar, instead of running... one thing, I'll go back real quick. When I talk about Zing, you either want to be running the Dust Tornadoes or the Zing most of the time because they don't combo together super well. But one thing that does combo well is if you run Zing and you run Jar of Greed, because what you can do is if you're in a pinch and you really need to shut off one of your opponent's back rows to make a big push, they can set something, and then in the end phase you can Zing their thing and then also target your own Jar of Greed and then chain it and then get a draw, and still lock them out of their one thing. Because when you Zing, you have to target at least 2 set spell and traps, but if you chain Jar to it, then you can get a draw. So that's a cool little combo. If you're running, we've seen builds that have been successful running like 2 Zing and 2 Jar, stuff like that. So that's an option as well if you want to go that variation. Cypher Soldier, this card was popular when in GOAT format's resurgence, and then it fell off, and now it's kind of coming back again. Mainly because good Warrior players in the mirror match, they're very often going to be siding out their Kaikus nowadays, because the Kaiku is just not that amazing in the mirror match. It's okay, but it gets the job done. And Kaiku is pretty good against this card because once they turn it to offense, you just beat over it because it's not a Warrior. But with that being the case nowadays, I mean, Cypher Soldier can be really effective. He can be a really, really big threat that Warriors have to deal with as quickly as possible. And if you're looking at a handful of Warriors and you see a Cypher Soldier face up on your opponent's side of the field, you're kind of screwed. So you have to find an out to it. Good against the mirror match. Chaos Sorcerer, there's been some builds of Warrior that run like extra lights and extra darks, and you can consider doing that with the Chaos Sorcerer as well if you want to go more Chaos Warriors, though that that kind of has fallen out of favor, I think mainly because it's just a more subpar version of Chaos and Warriors at the same time, but it still can work. So there's ways that you can fit Sorcerer into Warriors if you want to. Magic Cylinder, this is another great card that you can side in against the mirror match, because very often it comes down to those solemn wars where very quickly you and your opponent will get down to 4,000, 2,000 life points, and a Magic Cylinder on a Blade Knight can just end the game right there. So a very underrated card in the mirror match. And then Sanguine, people don't play Sanguine in Warriors as much anymore, but it still can be good. You destroy it. You can search out Faith if you have it in the main. You can search out Exiled Force. You can search out DD Warrior Lady. You can search out Donzalug. So there's quite a few options with Sanguine of what you can search out. So these are just a general list of different card choices that you can try out. Maybe some of them have inspired you to try them out, or this in general is just a kind of wide list of different card choices that you can try in Warriors. Just wanted to give you an idea of the different side deck and main deck options that are out there so that you can kind of adjust accordingly when you're building your side deck or building your Warrior main deck. All right, so we are now talking about side decking. I think that a lot of newer players want a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to side decking. They want to know, all right, you put in these 4 cards and you take out these 4 cards, but it's just not that simple. It never has been. Side decking is a skill that you have to learn. You have to use trial and error to figure out what you're actually doing in side decking. It's not so simple. There's a very wide variety of factors that play a role in how you side deck. I mean, one of them is how your opponent plays. I mean, if your opponent is playing incredibly aggressive, you might side deck differently than if they're playing very passive, even if they're using the same deck. I mean, whether you're going first or second is a huge part of how you side deck, especially with cards like Trap Dust Shoot. There's a lot of factors that play into how you're side decking. The variations of the deck that your opponent is playing, like those variations that I showed earlier of Warriors, I will side deck differently according to every single one of those variations for the most part. So you just have to kind of adapt, you have to practice, and you have to figure it out on your own. You know, not to be harsh, but that's just the nature of side decking. So I want to show you just in general how I kind of side deck. Generally, sort of my thought process. This is not a perfect template for how to do it. You have to figure out a lot of it on your own. But I want to give you an idea of how I approach side decking in the Warrior matchup. Or in playing Warriors, excuse me. So let's look at a few different matchups. Let's first look at let's do the mirror match. So let's say we're playing against Warriors. I'm going into game 2. If I happen to lose game 1, and so I'm going first game 2, there's the potential to maybe keep in these dust shoots, but for the most part, I don't like to keep in trap dust shoots against Warriors. So let's take those out. I also am assuming my opponent is not on flip Warriors, and I'm assuming my opponent is not siding into a bunch of flips, which they very well could be. If you have a read that your opponent, might be doing that, or they have a history of siding into a bunch of flips, then maybe you don't want to side out your noblemans. But in general, I'm going to side out the noblemans against the mirror match. I'm also going to go out and side out Mystic Swordsman level 2. It's just not fantastic in the Warrior mirror because they're not setting that many things as well. So usually I'll do something like this. I'll kind of see what I want to side out first, and then of course I'll figure out what I want to bring in, and then I'll adjust accordingly. So right now I'm siding out 4 spells and traps and 1 monster. You always want to keep your ratios, similar. You don't want to, you can always add a monster here or there. You can, right now I have 14 monsters in the main. I can go into game 2 with 15 monsters. It's not going to screw up the consistency of my deck, but I don't want to go overboard because you ruin the whole functioning of your deck if you're having way too many monsters or way too few monsters. It messes up your ratios and can throw off the consistency of your deck. So I want to go in with these battle traps. Battle traps are really good against Warriors. So let's go ahead and go in with both of these Widespread Ruins and the 3rd Sakuretsu Armor. I'm also going to go ahead and side into the Tsukiyomi as well, because I like Tsukiyomi in the mirror match. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cards so far. We'll go with the Brain Control, really, really good against the mirror match. So I'll consider that as well. So I kind of have decent look so far at what I'm going to be doing, but there's still more changes I want to make. I really like 7 tools because very often Warriors is going to be running Solemn Judgments, and like I mentioned, 7 tools can be very effective against Solemn. So in most instances, I will side out the 3rd Dust Tornado for the 7 tools because it kind of is replacing it in some ways. And then I also really want to get these spies involved. I side very heavily for the mirror match, if you can't tell. This is typically more than you'd be siding for most matchups. So I'm going to side in both of these spies And so I want to keep my ratios right. So I want to take out 2 monsters. So there's several ways you can do this. I think in the mirror, you could probably go with 2 of the Kaikus, because Kaiku's just not that great in the mirror, or you could go Kaiku Donzalug, something along those lines. You don't want to, Blade Knight's so important in the mirror, and you also got to keep an eye on your light and dark ratios for BLS, because if you side out too many of your lights or too many of your darks, then BLS is not good anymore. So I'll go, just for this example, I'll go with 2 of the Kaikus, because I feel like Donzalug can still be good in the mirror match. And I think that seems pretty good. I'm not going to go with the Mobius yet, even though I'm bringing in the mind control, because depending on what my opponent does, you could also go with the Mobius as well. So it looks like we're going to be siding in 1, 2, 3 monsters and siding out 5 spell and traps. So 3 monsters, 5 spell and traps. We're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spell and traps and 3 monsters. Nice. Keeping the ratios very good. Let's swap that out. And then here's what our deck looks like heading into games 2 and potentially 3 against the Warrior matchup. So that's kind of an idea how I side there. Let's look at the Chaos Turbo matchup. Now, in general, this very standard list of Warriors, your kind of goal is to main deck for Chaos, side deck for the mirror match or control, stuff like that. Really, because Turbo is so prevalent and because Warriors has such a decent matchup against it, you already have your main deck very set up for Chaos Turbo, so you'll be surprised to know that you really aren't doing too much sidings games 2 and 3 against Chaos Turbo. So here's where it comes in, whether I won or lost. If I won game 1, I will probably not side in the 3rd Dust Shoot, but if I lost and I'm going first, then I probably will side into the 3rd Dust Shoot. Regardless, I'm going to keep 2 of these in because Dust Shoot's just so good against Chaos Turbo, regardless of whether or not I'm going first or second. But let's say that I lost the first game, which very often happens. So let's side in this Dust Shoot. What else do we want to bring in? We probably want to bring in this Mind Control. That's one of the reasons I have it in the side against the Chaos matchup. If I see that my opponent is on Solemns, then I will potentially side into the 7 tools. But really, this is about it. I'm really not doing a ton here, and so I'm adding in 2 spells and traps. So I'm going to probably go with the Book of Moon and a Dust Tornado. I could also go Book of Moon and Saku if I want to, or something along those lines. You could even go like Book of Moon, Call of the Haunted, but it's really whatever your preference is. Like I said, there's no scientific theory to this. You got to kind of figure it out on your own, see what works for you, and adapt. So let's say my opponent is on Solemn. So I'll go with the Solemn, place of the Dust, and then I'll go out with one of the Sakus. But if I see my opponent siding into a bunch of Berserk Gorillas and Zombiras, then maybe I want to keep in these Sakus. So there's other adjustments to be made game 3 as well. So this is kind of a typical siding pattern against Chaos Turbo. Let's say that we are up against Control, which is a very, very difficult matchup. Well, it depends on what variation of Control they're on. If they're running Decrees, then I'm going to be bringing in the Cliff and the Mobius as well, because we got to get those Decrees out of there because of how many traps we run. So let's say they're just on a normal, Goat Control list without Decrees, kind of a standard trap lineup. So obviously the first thing is these Wangus want to come in. The Tsukiyomi needs to come in. I'll go ahead and go with the Mind Control because they're playing plenty of flips. And Dust Shoot is another decision, whether you want to do that or not. Let's say that I went ahead and lost. So I will go ahead and I will be going first. But I don't know if I want all 3 Dust Shoots going first against Goat Control, because sometimes they can whittle their cards down pretty quickly and the Dust Shoot can be dead. But let's go ahead and side it in. Let's say we lost game 1 and let's side it in. So I think that pretty much looks good here. No Decree, so I'm not going to go with the Cliff and Mobius, but you might want to do that. So I'm siding in 4 monsters and 2 spells and traps. And you see how I do this in different orders sometimes? I mean, you can do that. So you can do it however you want, whatever works. Plenty of players have different methods for how they side. I'm just showing you what I do. This is not the end-all be-all. This is just my idea of it. So we need to get these monsters in here. What are we going to do? What are we siding out? What are we siding in? So this is always tricky against the Control matchup, figuring out exactly what monsters to side out, what to side in. You could potentially go Breaker. I think I will go with Breaker. Breaker is so good, you very rarely want to side it out. especially against control if they're playing decrees, because they could be siding into decrees. So let's not do that. Let's keep Mr. Breaker in there. But I will side out. Let's go Donzalug. I'll go Kaiku. Kaiku's just not as good against control. I mean, it's all right, but it's just not getting the job done. So I'm going to go Kaiku. Most of the time, Goat Control is not playing Gravekeeper Spy, so I'm willing to side out a Sasuke. And then, I mean, really, I guess I'll go with another Kaiku. So as you can tell, I don't have a super, hard theory for how I do all this. I just kind of figure it out as I go. So there's 4 monsters. And then Spell and Trap, I want to keep the Book of Moon in. Too good against the control matchup. You got to have that. Sometimes I'll even have a book in the side as well. But I think in this matchup, I will take out a Dust Tornado and I will take out a Saku. You could do double Saku because the battle traps are not as good against the control matchup. But yeah, so I think this is a decent little siding pattern here. One thing to also keep in mind though is I might consider siding out the BLS now because I have less darks. I think the ratios are still okay. I have 3 darks still left in my deck, but you got to pay attention to that because that can affect how you do things. So that's kind of my control siding. What else could we potentially be playing against? If I'm playing against like Earth Aggro, it'll be pretty similar to how I'm siding against Warriors. If I'm playing against Burn, for example, this is a controversial one. Like I said, I just don't know 100%, but this is kind of what I'm thinking. Solemns I want to take out because they can be very tricky. I want to bring in Mobius. I want to bring in 7 tools. I want to bring in these Wangus to protect against the Odrama trios, stuff like that. I'm not going to go through, the siding pattern of every single deck, but you just have to figure it out on your own. Just think in general, what cards are good in this matchup, what cards are not, adjust accordingly, keep your ratios right, and you should be golden. So this was a very broad look at how I side with Warriors, but like I said, it's not super concrete. So yeah. Hopefully this guide helped you in some small way, if at all. Hopefully if you're newer to GOAT format or to trying Warriors, it gave you, a decent foundation to build upon, gave you a decent idea of how the deck is supposed to function. But ultimately at the end of the day, you just got to play the games. You just got to get the reps in. When you play GOAT format, you're going to be putting yourself in a lot of very uncomfortable situations. You're going to have to think a lot. You're going to be faced with uphill climbs a lot of games because of the variance and luck that's involved. And when you put yourself in those uncomfortable situations, you will fail and you'll make big misplays, as all of us do. But the more familiar the more familiar you are with these situations, the more you fail, the more you'll know what to do that next time. And it'll make you better and better and better. And next thing you know, you'll be taking games off of really, really good duelists. So ultimately, you got to get the reps in. You just got to play, you got to practice, and you'll figure a lot of this out on your own. I think also one of the really helpful things is it's not fun, but sitting down and reviewing some of your replays. On my own YouTube channel, I do a lot of Warrior replays. If you're interested in seeing some of that, check that out. But ultimately, that's a good way to do it. Watch replays from other really good duelists. Watch replays from tournaments where good players are playing, and you'll learn a lot. I think also one of the keys to enjoying this game and to having a good time is finding something and making it your own. Hopefully you saw some of those variations of Warriors and maybe one of them was interesting to you, or you see some way that you might want to take it. People will tell you, hey, this doesn't work, this will work, this is bad, this isn't bad, but ultimately it's up to you. If you find something that you think is underrated or has hidden potential that people aren't realizing it, then give it a shot. Try to make it work. I think we need more innovation in the format. And so I think there's still a lot of room for innovation. So find something, make it your own, and you just got to get the reps in. You just got to practice, and it'll make you better and better and better. If you keep trying, if you're playing on ladder and, ladder is getting frustrating, then get on the GOAT format Discord or the GOAT format Europe Discord. There's tons of opportunities to play against other really good players that'll make you better. Most of them are very friendly and will help you out if you ask for advice from certain people, myself included. So feel free to reach out. I mean, you just got to get the reps in. You just got to get the practice in. Get on the Discord. Get involved in some tournaments. That's the best way to really get good quick, is to play against the higher echelon of competition. There's the GOAT Format Friday tournaments. Every Friday, those are a great way to kind of dip your toes in the water with tournaments on GOAT Format. There is also the Academy League on the GOAT Format Europe Discord. It's another great way to get involved in playing some kind of lower stakes tournaments. Then there's the big tournaments, the majors, the GFCs, the FLCs. There are other great ways to get involved and play against good players. So I encourage you to just get out there, do it, play some games, play some tournaments, and you will rapidly improve. All right, to end this video off, I wanted to leave you with something kind of fun. Just a quick little exercise that might be interesting to you. This might be the most obvious thing in the world, but if you're newer, it might be fun. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a duel puzzle here. Now, this is harder to do in GOAT format because there's not as many, a lot of the situations that you put yourself in, there's not an 100% best way to go or not. But in this situation, I want you to find lethal from this position that we're in right here, playing Warriors against Chaos Turbo. Now, let me contextualize these things. This was a GOAT format War League match. I played against Crowd Dad, really, really good. Duelist, and this situation, we had just dust shooted our opponent. We used trap dust shoot, and we saw their hand. We know that more than likely they have Magician of Faith set, and more than likely they have Widespread Ruin set. With that knowledge, try to find lethal. I also will show that we have Ring of Destruction set in our graveyard. We have Kaiku in the grave, Solemn, Rhoda, Dust Shoot, and Pot of Greed. So from this situation, pause the video. I want you to find lethal damage so that we can win this game, based off the knowledge that Faith is set and that Widespread Ruin is set, more than likely. All right. So I actually, when I was making this, I realized there's two different ways this can be done. There's probably more. There might be something that's just super obvious that I'm missing. That happens all the time. But to find lethal damage, we need to get this BLS on board, right? BLS Ring is just a nasty, nasty combination. So often. So we need to get a light into the grave. There's a couple ways to do that. We could summon Exiled, tribute it off to destroy our own Blade Knight, thus getting us a light in the dark in the grave. Then we mind control the Faith, MST the Widespread Ruin, but that's only hitting for 7,600 damage when you add Ring onto the end. There you could also potentially go like Tribe, discard the Exile to destroy Calling Warrior, then destroy the Blade Knight, then you have a light and dark, but you're in the exact same situation you mentioned earlier. So we need to take advantage of this mind control, of the Faith, of the spells we have in our graveyard to make this BLS live and hit for lethal damage. So ultimately what we end up doing, and this took me probably longer than it should have to figure out, but we'll go ahead and mind control the Faith. You can do this in any order because we know that the set's probably Widespread Ruin. Probably the best play would be to MST first. That was a mistake. Probably MST first just to see what they have set, just to make sure that it's the Widespread Ruin. But regardless, we're going all this assumption that's what it's set. It's a battle trap, so whatever. So off of the Faith, I think the initial knee-jerk reaction is to grab Pot of Greed, but we have lethal with Rhoda because we need to get a light into the grave. So we MST the Widespread Ruin. We Rhoda for Sasuke. You could also grab Blade Knight here. You could grab DD Warrior Lady here. It doesn't matter. Then we're going to use Trap Effect. We're going to call Spellcaster to destroy the Magician of Faith. And there we go. We get light and dark into the grave. We're attacking for so much damage. And then with the Ring on the BLS at the end, it's way more than lethal. So that is one way to do it. The other way I figured out was if we just summon Exiled Force, go ahead and mind control the Faith, flip it up. You can use Pot of Greed or Rhoda, it doesn't matter. Then you would attack with Exiled, Blade Knight at 2,000, and with Tribe. And then main phase 2, you use anything from the card that you have in hand, whether that be Rhoda or Pot of Greed. You discard it off a Tribe to destroy your Blade Knight. Then you still have Light and Dark and Grave, and then you still ring the BLS. So there's a couple ways to do that. But hopefully you came to one of those conclusions at least. Maybe you found a different way to do it. That's cool. But I just wanted to end this off with something fun like that. So overall, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I made this just because I love Yu-Gi-Oh! I love GOAT format. So, hopefully you enjoyed it. I would just encourage you guys that are newer to get involved. You veterans, I want to see some stuff like this from you. That would be super, super cool for the community. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, see you later. Bye.